We finished, while we did a little bit of technical evaluation of our complicated setup. This morning, some of you will be happy to see Dr. Henry Perry again. He has contributed to our classes over the past year or more with good observations and questions. And today he gets to be in front of us. I won't say too much more because his presentation will include some autobiographical bits, and the less I talk and the more he talks, the better it will be. Just a second or two, you will be seeing Dr. Henry Perry. Welcome.
Thanks so much, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I've really been enriched by being a part of this Sunday school class when I was able to attend, mostly during the time of COVID, but I like to come back when I can, and I'm very appreciative to have a chance to speak with you this morning. We moved back to Durham 2 years ago after being away for many, many years, working in many parts of the world. And I'm continuing as a semi-retired faculty member of the Department of International Health at Johns Hopkins. But as you'll learn more in a few minutes, I've got a lot of deep roots here at Duke. And so it's great to share with you all a little bit about my own personal experience, but also a little broader reflection on some of the issues that flow around global health from a Christian perspective. I want to first share a little bit about what I think are some big issues in global health, then tell a little bit about my own personal experience, and then finish up on challenging all of us, including me, about some of the moral and ethical challenges that flow around this field of global health that we hear a lot about. I want to read something to you first, and this is the following. So think about this as I'm reading. On your way to work, you pass a small pond. On hot days, children sometimes play in the pond, which is only about knee deep. The weather's cool today, though, and the hour is early, so you were surprised to see a child splashing about in the pond. As you get closer, you see that it is a very young child, just a toddler, who is flailing about, unable to stay upright or walk out of the pond. You look for the parents or babysitter, but there is no one else around. The child is unable to keep his head above the water for more than a few seconds at a time. If you don't wade in and pull him out, he seems likely to drown. Wading in is easy and safe, but you will ruin the new shoes you bought only a few days ago and get your suit wet and muddy. By the time you hand the child over to someone responsible for him and change your clothes, you'll be late for work. What should you do? This may seem a bit humorous, but it's got a lot of depth to it, as I hope you'll appreciate here in just a minute. What I read to you is the first page of Peter Singer's book, The Life You Could Save. Peter Singer is a bioethicist at Princeton, and his book is something that I think should be required reading for every thoughtful Christian, as well as any thoughtful human being, as a matter of fact. But I wanted to share with you a few facts that I think are terribly important for us to be aware of. And I think we have some sense of this, but not at the degree that we should have, I don't think. if you look at this slide, there's a lot of detail here, but the bottom line you see in the bottom line is there are 25 million people dying each year from readily preventable or treatable conditions. These are conditions that we know how to prevent or treat with low-cost interventions. They don't require expensive hospital care or highly specialized medical treatment, physicians, technology, et cetera, et cetera. The parts of this that are most important, I think, are the ones that I have outlined in red. 5.2 million children dying before live-born children dying before reaching the age of 5 from very readily preventable treatable conditions. 2 million infants dying in the birth process from lack of adequate attention during the delivery process itself. And then causes related to pregnancy and childbirth among mothers. These, I think, require our special attention because these are young people whose lives are before them. Of course, we can all appreciate how important mothers are, not only to their children, but to their families. On top of this, there are some other important facts that I think we need to keep in mind. The first one is that half of the world's population is lacking access to basic and essential healthcare services. And 5 billion people lack access to surgical care when they need it. The United Nations has made a goal in concert with all the countries of the world to achieve universal health coverage by the year 2030. But the United Nations now estimates that at the current rate, that would only be achieved for a third of the world's population. So with that framework, let me share with you a little bit about my own personal narrative. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. Our family was a member of a small new Methodist church that was meeting in a schoolhouse. And when I was 12, when our family was attending a Maundy Thursday program, I was very moved by the call that came from this hymn that I heard my mother play on the piano. And it was the beginning of a call to me to spend my life working for the medical needs of underserved people around the world. And so I came to this very deep insight at age 12 that if Jesus had died for my sins, the least I could do was spend my life working so that other people could live who otherwise might not have lived. So this hymn, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, I'm sure we all know it, but it's a very powerful statement for me and continues to guide my work. And the last stanza of that is the following. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. So it was that last phrase that really grabbed me and still guides my life here some 60 years later, I guess. But shortly after that, our church in Greensboro had the opportunity to connect with a man named Ernest Sundram, who was from India originally. His father was a bishop of the Methodist Church in India, as a matter of fact. And he had trained to become a surgeon and was spending his last year of surgical training here at Duke, working with a renowned thoracic and cardiac surgeon named Will Seeley. And our church took him on as its medical missionary, and our family got to know him, and I got to know him. And he became an inspiration for me as I grew up. I came to Duke as an undergraduate in 1965, and after 3 years, I went on to medical school here at Duke for 2 years. And in the summer of 1969, which was following my first year of medical school, I signed up on a trip that was sponsored by Duke Chapel. Howard Wilkinson was the chaplain at Duke at that time and was a friend of a Methodist missionary in Bolivia by the name of Milton Robinson. Milton Robinson and Howard had been roommates in seminary, and they decided it would be a great thing to have Duke get together a group of students to go down to where Milton was working in rural Bolivia. And I heard about it and signed up. My girlfriend, Alice Weldon, who later became my wife and partner in the initial stages of this, she and I went on this group together. We had an amazing experience there, and it was a life-changing experience for me. After 2 years of medical school, I went off to Johns Hopkins to study public health and finish medical school there, and then later trained in general surgery. And then I had always planned to and intended to become a Methodist medical missionary, but those plans fell through. And William Anlian, who was the Chancellor for Health Affairs at Duke, had learned about me and had an interest in what I was doing. And he told me one time if Duke could help in any way, to be sure to let him know. And so when our intended hopes for working as Methodist medical missionaries in Latin America somewhere, after that fell through, I got in touch with him and said, is there any way that Duke might consider sponsoring this? And so after various discussions and so forth, reports, proposals, he got back to me and he said, Duke will sponsor this under two terms. The first condition is that Duke has none of its own money to put into this. And number two, Henry Peary will raise the money for it. So I thought that was a good deal, and I took it on, and we started a project in Bolivia in 1981, which was called the Andean Rural Health Project under the sponsorship of Duke University. And so we moved, my family and I moved down to Bolivia in 1981, and we began what turned out to be a very difficult and challenging experience trying to start a health project, which someday I'll write a book about, but it turned out to be quite difficult and challenging for many reasons. But I'd like to tell people when I was living down there that I was the highest paid surgeon in the world. We were working at 13,000 feet. But after 3 years of that, we had to leave for political reasons. And I thought what we had started had come to naught. But through God's mysterious ways, somehow this got going. Our family had decided to leave Bolivia for safety reasons. And I started a practice of general surgery in the mountains of North Carolina in Waynesville, west of Asheville. And we began at that time to be an NGO, an independent non-governmental organization. And the next, well, let me back up a minute. During that time at Duke, when we were under the sponsorship of Duke, our very first employee was a woman named Susan Jones, who is the wife of Greg Jones, an esteemed figure within the medical school. So Greg's mother, Bonnie Jones, had heard us speak in 1981 before we actually went to Bolivia, and her husband tragically and unexpectedly died in 1982, Jameson Jones, who was the dean of Duke Divinity School at that time. And several years later, Bonnie decided she wanted to work full-time for us as a volunteer to help us raise money for Andean rural healthcare, as we called it at that time, by the time we set up our office in the mountains of North Carolina at Lake Junaluska, which is a Methodist assembly ground. So Bonnie and I worked together for almost a decade from the late 1980s through that time. And so what came out of that was what today is called Cure America's Global, but at that time we called it Andean Rural Healthcare. And I want to show this video, which is a little bit laudatory towards me, but that's not the reason I want to show it. I want to show it to give you a sense of what we were doing and what the work that I've been closely associated with for a long time is all about. So I don't know exactly how the technology is going to work on this, but I've got a link here. Should I hit that, or do you want to hit another button? I hope you'll be able to see and hear this. Say something.
Physician, surgeon, researcher, writer, educator, innovator, thought leader. Dr. Henry Perry is all of these and much more. His life work has been driven by the firm belief that all people everywhere deserve access to primary care. That's care that's so basic, we easily take it for granted, like aspirin, nutrition, sanitation. Yet today, for billions of people, that's not available. In spite of dramatic advances in the biomedical sciences and technology, each year, almost 7 million children die from conditions that are readily preventable. More than 300,000 women die from readily treatable conditions in childbirth. Millions more die from treatable infections, including HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. As a young doctor, Dr. Perry had formal training in medicine and general surgery, as well as public health, anthropology, and sociology. While his private medical practice was rewarding, he believed there was a way he could do even more to save lives, and he left his practice to travel the world, working with those who were medically underserved in places like Bolivia, Bangladesh, Haiti, and other developing countries. Through our commitment to Ronald McDonald Charities, we understand the value of community, and so does Dr. Perry. His methodology is community-based and impact-oriented. Often public health is geared towards thinking of communities as a target rather than a resource. With Dr. Perry's collaborative approach, the community improves its own health through actions they can take on their own. In the beginning, he had to overcome tremendous obstacles, including earning the trust of those he served. Some even thought he was an agent for the CIA. Yet he persevered, working with programs around the world that empower communities and caregivers of children so that children receive better care and chances for survival to age 5 are enhanced. Dr. Perry's more than 100 publications have established him as a global champion for primary healthcare movement. Through his teaching at Johns Hopkins University and his popular online courses, he has inspired and mentored thousands of students and practitioners. He founded an organization called Cure Americas Global. RMHC has been proud to partner with them to help make measurable and sustainable improvements in the health and well-being of communities worldwide. Their vision is to provide hope through health, a world free of suffering from treatable and preventable causes. We are closer to that goal because of the work and the passion and the commitment of Dr. Henry Perry.
In the high mountains of Bolivia, in the most remote villages, healthcare as we know it is almost non-existent. Early in his career, Dr. Henry Perry lived and worked alongside the indigenous people, providing healthcare services.
I wanted to be a medical missionary. That was my original calling, and I wanted to be out there helping and feeling the pain that people had and being with them and addressing their medical problems.
He's always wanted to reach people who are very vulnerable, and we often find there's vulnerable populations in areas that are hard to reach, that are sometimes very dispersed.
Every day you came across people who had enormous medical problems that you knew could be prevented or could be treated if the proper program were set up that didn't require expensive or sophisticated medical services.
He realized that just the skills that he had, even as a surgeon, weren't enough to reach the number of people who needed medical care. So that kind of inspired him to start an organization and train community health workers and address the problem more from a public health perspective.
Dr. Perry devised a delivery plan centered on using local community health workers, neighbors really, who would routinely visit and teach basic healthcare practices.
Henry is seeing the fact that The majority of healthcare delivery takes place in the household. Many behaviors could be practiced in the home that would save children's lives if only people had that knowledge and that sort of data and understanding of what to do.
By developing close relationships with the people, healthcare workers can create programs that meet local health needs. After several years, the community noticed dramatic changes because of Dr. Perry's project.
Yes, I remember before the project came, many children died, especially the very young ones. The project has helped our community very much.
Through Dr. Perry's NGO, Cure Americas Global, his methodology was implemented in Guatemala, India, and Africa, and all proved to have the same powerful impact on healthcare. Lives were saved. Dr. Perry left his clinical career to devote more time to research and writing about his public health strategies.
What he realized was if you want to have an impact, you have to go beyond a given one patient, one doctor interaction. If you want to affect the health of a population, of a nation, you have to think on a bigger scale, and that's what he's done.
He's been one of the preeminent, say, researchers who's been able to write about it and gone out and collected the data to prove that this approach can work, and then published it in scientific journals.
A lot of the key people that make decisions, they look at the scientific literature to find out what they should be doing. Henry's taught me that if you want to influence people, you need to publish.
Henry's goal and everything that he taught us was to always try to find a way to reach the people, the hardest to reach, the most vulnerable populations, and give them the knowledge and the skills and the resources for them to make the decisions, to empower them to make a difference in their lives.
I think years ago, people would say, oh, we can only save 80% of children's lives or women's lives in the world. And Henry's one of the people who says, no, we can save all women and children from dying from preventable causes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ronald McDonald House Charities presents the 2013 Medical Award of Excellence to Dr. Henry Perry.
Henry, on behalf of the Board of Trustees of Ronald McDonald House Charities, we proudly present you with the 2013 Medical Award of Excellence, and with it a grant of $100,000.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I am deeply honored to accept this magnificent award because of the recognition that it brings to the work that I and so many others do on behalf of children around the world. And thank you, David Herman, for nominating me. I want to thank my lovely, beautiful wife, Marilyn, who is with me tonight, for her love and support. My sons, Baker and Luke, who are here tonight, my sisters, Donna, Doris, and Susan, and my Cure Americas Global family who have a table here tonight too. So it's great to have all of them with me. All of their love and encouragement have meant so much to me. Today, almost 1,000 children around the world are dying every hour. That's almost 7 million a year. 99% of these deaths occur in poor countries, mostly from readily preventable and treatable conditions, such as pneumonia, malaria, diarrhea, undernutrition, and vaccine preventable diseases. Although the world has made enormous progress in reducing child deaths, almost 7 million is still far too many. We now know that through programs such as the ones that Cure America's Global implements in Bolivia, Guatemala, Liberia, Kenya, and soon in Sierra Leone, community level workers can partner with mothers and children to dramatically reduce the number of these deaths at a very low cost. And these programs are not just handouts. They are partnerships that empower mothers and communities and build local capacity so that the results are long lasting. I have been privileged to give my life to this work, and I am proud to donate the financial gift I am receiving with this award to Cure America's Global. I applaud Ronald McDonald House Charities and you who are here tonight for your support that helps make this donation possible. In May, I had the privilege of visiting the Ronald McDonald House in Guatemala City, the same one that JC mentioned before dinner. And I left with tears in my eyes arising from two very different emotions. I was so moved to see children and their families feeling very much at home and cared for in such a lovely new facility near a hospital where they received highly specialized medical treatments. But I had just traveled that very morning from one of the most isolated and poorest parts of Guatemala. I felt so deeply that these mothers and children deserve the same level of support and attention. I love children, and I have found it deeply satisfying to be able to work on behalf of mothers and children around the world who suffer and die in silence. Their suffering has kept me going, and so has their determination, grace, and dignity. These are the people who really deserve this award. We need to hear their voices and understand their plight, and we need to take action. So let me challenge you here tonight, and Ronald McDonald House Charities as well, to become fully engaged in the emerging global movement to end preventable maternal and child deaths in only 2 decades by the year 2035. This is a campaign that UNICEF and the World Health Organization have just established. Its success will be one of the greatest achievements in history. But success will require all of us as a global family working together, as individuals, communities, businesses, foundations, civil society, and governments. Drawing inspiration from President Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, let me end by saying that it is for us, the living, you and me, to dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work that remains, so that millions and millions more mothers and children will not die as a result of our own indifference and lack of resolve. Or, as I heard someone say years ago in less eloquent terms, yes, let's remember and honor the dead, those who have gone before us, but let us fight like hell for the living. Thank you. As you can see, that video is 8 years old now, but still a lot of effort went in to make that for that wonderful award I got. But it's also, I think, a good way to convey a lot of important information in a very short period of time. I want to shift gears now and call your attention to some of the issues that I've raised, and I want you to think about them. One of the moral and ethical challenges that flow around what you've heard this morning. I like to think of morality as what is right and wrong and what society, institutions, organizations, and governments should do, what is just. And then on the ethical side, I think of it as what you and I as individuals should be doing as morally conscious human beings. And from the Christian ethical standpoint, even beyond what basic human ethics requires, I think there's another challenge for us. And what should you and I as followers of Jesus do in the world in which we live today? Martin Luther King had a famous statement that I like to refer to from time to time. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. I think we could extend that statement to say not only injustice in healthcare, but also injustice in health status, because health is so much dependent on not only healthcare, but many other elements that flow around the way we live our lives and the environment in which we live. I'm sure many of you are great fans of Nicholas Kristof, just like I am. And you may have read in the New York Times yesterday that he has resigned his position as one of the greatest columnists of all times to go into politics and run for governor of the state of Oregon. But he wrote this very powerful essay in the New York Times in 2020, which it was entitled "The Mistakes That Will Haunt Our Legacy." And he wrote the following: "What will our great-grandchildren find bewildering and immoral about our own times? This is a question highly relevant to us in the United States, as we find our own history of slavery and racism so bewildering and immoral." And I certainly have, the more I read about our history of racial relations in the States. A part of his answer to that question contained the following: "A second area, in addition to denialism about climate change and abuse of animals in factory farms that will leave future generations baffled at our heartlessness, is our indifference to suffering in impoverished countries. More than 5 million young children will die this year around the world from diarrhea, malnutrition, and other ailments. We let these children perish essentially because of our tribalism. They are not a priority for us." So I want to pose to you today this question: what would Jesus be doing today if he were with us in the world in which we find ourselves? And does his example of love and practical acts of compassion for the sick, suffering, and marginalized and downtrodden motivate us? I love this picture, the statue of Christ, which is in the lobby of Johns Hopkins Hospital. And at the bottom of it, it says, "Come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest." I read a long time ago, I think a famous theologian wrote this, but this person said something to the effect: those who read the Bible on an empty stomach read a very different Bible from those of us who read the Bible on a full stomach. So we are obviously people who are well nourished and well taken care of in the society in which we live, but there's a whole other world out there that we're disconnected from, and I hope I can bring you a little bit closer to that world today through my comments here. So I want to throw the floor open for discussion if we could, and I'd like to hear any thoughts that you might have about what you see as our ethical responsibility as Christians to those who are dying around the world from readily preventable and treatable conditions. And I don't know whether, will people hear you if you speak?
You'll need to repeat the question.
Oh, okay, sure, okay.
Husband and helping around the place. But when we know that we should have time, how do we some things away from things that they shouldn't have? I can never quite get the way of how do you get one person and then Christians, so on, getting, how can you talk about where would you be seeing if you didn't have to do that? So I just wondered. Yeah, I was in, I was in the Peace Corps and came back. It was wonderful, wonderful. But then the next thing that comes out, it is about nothing left because they had to get out of the place. I'm just saying it for it because I like to talk about thinking my own self. But I just wonder, Christians, whoever, people who are not necessarily knowing you or not coming about that, but I just wonder, what would you be thinking right now or about this time? I was in, yeah, you could tell me, Nelson.
I'll try to summarize that.
Yeah.
So I think the gist of the question is sometimes the problems of the world seem so overwhelming. How can we as one person, whether working from a Christian perspective or whatever good intentions, how do we keep from feeling like we did our best, but gosh, did it really make any difference?
Well, that's a great question, and I struggle with this every day. It's such an immense problem. Does anything that I do make any difference? I'm sure many of you have heard the anecdote of a couple who were walking down the beach, and there were all kinds of dead starfish on the shore, and this, or they weren't dead, but they'd been, I guess, tossed up on the shore, and this one person was throwing a starfish back into the water, and then he'd pick up another one and throw that one in. And so his partner said, why are you doing that? That seems like a waste of time. And the person's response was, well, it makes a difference to that one starfish. And I think that's a helpful way of thinking about this, because obviously what each one of us as individuals can do is small, but I mean, it does have value. And everybody working together, the net effect of that is obviously can be quite substantial. So I think we need to think of this in a very microscopic kind of a way. And what can we do? What are we called to do that we can do that's going to make a difference? And try not to get too despairing about the bigger picture, which I think is kind of built into our Christian faith as well. So that was great. Would somebody else like to make a comment? I'd be eager to hear what you were thinking. Unmute yourself and speak.
Well, since I have easy access to the microphone, I'll pose a question, a hard one maybe, save time for repeating it. Current events. Some of you are eligible to receive a COVID vaccine booster shot. Some of you might have read statistics that, booster shot to somebody who's already fully vaccinated is worth this much, whereas the first dose to somebody who hasn't gotten any is worth this much. Can we imagine, we don't own our personal size cryogenic refrigerators to get our one dose shipped thousands of miles away to somebody who could benefit more. But on that hard question, any deep insight?
Great, that was important issue. So I'll respond to that in maybe somewhat of a tangential way. COVID is obviously on our mind, and it's of great importance to us and our own society and our loved ones. And it's a terribly important global issue as well, of course. But if you remember from the early slide I showed about the number of people who are dying around the world, the number of people who are dying each year in the last year or so, I checked this out. If you look at the number of deaths on a 12-month basis that have taken place since the COVID epidemic began, it adds up to 3 million people. And we're talking about 25 million people dying from readily preventable or treatable conditions. And if you think about the amount of money that's been poured into the COVID response, I mean, it's in the trillions of dollars. And so much of that has been driven by our own self-interest. We want to prevent COVID. We want to stop it. It has an important implication for our economy and our well-being. And so what's sad about this is that we can't look beyond that. I mean, if it's in our own self-interest, we can mobilize a lot of energy, and the kinds of things that children die from around the world are not things that are real to us anymore. They used to be, but they're not. And so to me, the COVID pandemic is an opportunity to think about what we're able to mobilize as a society in response to a public health problem, a global public health problem, but it needs to be seen in the broader picture of the reality of the world in which we live in today. So I can't solve the political problem of whether President Biden is going to invest billions of dollars in an additional booster shot and prevent people from around the world from getting that. Those are major political issues that, are far beyond my pay scale. But still, I think it's an opportunity to think about what is our responsibility. And there are all kinds of justice issues that are being raised by ethicists about our obligation to make COVID vaccine available to those around the world. But it's just a small part of a much bigger issue from my perspective. So I hope you've had sufficient time to think about a response to my questions. So you're being very timid. So I'd like for somebody else to speak up. Elaine, you're smiling there, so say something. You're muted. Unmute yourself. You're still muted. Unmute yourself, I think. Maybe while you're trying to unmute yourself, does somebody else have something to say?
Okay, I've got it. Okay. Well, yeah. Lots of questions coming up here, lots of responses and thoughts. My feeling that something I've done for the last couple of years, which is of course a drop in the bucket, but I have a friend, a former student actually, who is a doctor and serves with Doctors Without Borders. And so partly because of his inspiration, I just make a small monthly gift to that organization. So whatever that can do is one way of responding. But yes, I think the thing about the shots, I just got my booster, okay? So I'm full mention here. It's kind of like when your parents told you to eat your spinach because children in China were starving. I mean, I hope I'm not saying something horrible, but just because I don't get a booster, does that mean that somebody else will automatically get it? I mean, I understand the big problem. It's political, and I hope that I really hope we will give as many shots as we can free of charge to the rest of the world, and also help them to make their own vaccines. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Anybody else want to make a comment of how to respond as thinking, devoted followers of Jesus Christ to this issue? Well, let me make a comment, and that is that you can tell how passionate I am about this, but still, it's not easy for me. I mean, I can be pulled away in many other directions that don't specifically address these concerns. And so I know how hard it is, and we have many thoughts about how to live a faithful life, and how to spend our time and how to spend our money. And it's not easy. We live in a world with so many opportunities and so many resources. It's very hard to come up with a clear, thoughtful set of priorities for what to do. And there are lots of worthwhile issues out there to be thinking about and contributing to, and I'm well aware of that. I had hoped to provoke a little bit more discussion on this, but I'm not going to belabor the point if nobody is really willing to step up to the plate and make a comment. Maybe somebody would want to debate what I've said and have some disagreement about it. I'd love that. So this is kind of your last chance. I have more to say, but I wanted to give you a chance to participate and make this as interactive as possible. So this is your last moment, as the auctioneer says.
Your slide share of PowerPoint then? Or?
Yeah. I'll revert to my PowerPoint now. So, it's wonderful. I have a technology savvy person standing at my side. I'd be in bad trouble if I didn't have him. Thanks.
One slide ahead of where you want to be.
No, this is where I want to be. Thanks. This is what Peter Singer says in response to this question, not from a Christian standpoint. I understand that he's an atheist. I'm not 100% sure about that, but he certainly isn't approaching this issue from a Christian perspective. And his whole book, as I mentioned, The Life You Can Save, which I highly recommend, is devoted to this question about what the issue is and what we as thoughtful people should be doing in response to this issue. And so obviously, there are a whole set of issues about how we can respond to the dilemma that I raised at the very beginning of the man who's walking through the park and who sees the child drowning in a pond. That's a metaphor for the world in which we live today. And we can actually, without having to jump into the pond to save the child, we can actually, as individuals, save children by making a financial contribution to organizations that are devoted to this work. And then, of course, there are all kinds of issues about, well, how do we know whether this organization's any good or not? Are they a fake? Are they really not accomplishing what they say they are? And so there are a whole host of issues around that, which he fully appreciates and talks at some length about. And I think there are very important issues to be thinking about. But putting all that aside, his basic response is that once we have met our financial obligations for putting food on the table, having a decent house to live in, having a car to drive, having health insurance, putting money aside for retirement, getting our kids educated, once we've met those needs, we as middle-class people living in a wealthy country like the United States, we have money left over. And I don't think we always think of it that way, because we tend to get ourselves into commitments for things that aren't really absolutely necessary for our basic well-being. But if you sort of take that point of view that we don't necessarily need all the things that we invest money in, his basic position is that for all the money that we raise in our salaries and income of greater than $100,000, we should be giving 10% of that towards programs that are dedicated towards saving the lives of children around the world. And I think that's a fairly reasonable kind of thing to think about, and kind of a challenge for us to be considering if you want to take this issue seriously. He spends a lot of time in his book talking about how much good the wealthy people of the world could do if they would just spend a very small fraction of their resources towards addressing these issues. In fact, he makes a statement to the effect that if the wealthiest, whatever it is, 0.1% of the world just gave 10% of their income, not their wealth, but the money they're making every year, if they just gave 10% of what they were earning each year towards these problems, that would resolve all the problems of poverty and sickness and unnecessary deaths all around the world. It's not that much money when you look at it from a global perspective. So I'm going to make a pitch right now for a contribution to Cure America's. I'm not a fundraiser, and I don't enjoy raising money, but as you heard from the very beginning, William Anlian said I had to do this if we were going to get started. So I got forced into a fundraising mode early on, and I never have been comfortable with it. But Cure America's, which was Andino Healthcare originally, was founded in 1983. And so in only a little over a year from now, we're going to be celebrating our 40th anniversary. And I've been a part of this organization from the very beginning. And I can tell you with a great deal of truthfulness that raising money for something like this is not easy. Our organization has been up and down through many hard times, and you would think it would be easy to raise money for something like this, but it's not. We're a small organization. The headquarters are now in Raleigh. We're doing the best we can, and we have a great track record and a great approach towards saving the lives of children and mothers around the world. But raising money is not easy. So I think, if you're interested in putting some money into a program that's solid and effective, but it's not big and flashy and well known, then I think Cure America is a great option for you. I'm hoping that we're going to be changing the name of the organization in the near future, which will be a better representation of what we're about, but that's our name right now. Many people have heard of Save the Children. It's just one example of many organizations out there that are doing good work, and I think would be another option for you to think about. And of course, if you just look around, there are plenty of other options too. So I tried to think a little bit about what our response might be in the face of what I presented this morning. And I came across Matthew 10, 5 through 12. Jesus said, these 12 Jesus sent out, charging them to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You receive without pay, give without pay. So I think God loves a generous giver, and I think there's a lot that we can do if we just put our minds to it to think about what we might do to be helpful in this situation. Many years ago, I read a statement that's still reverberating with me, but I haven't been able to find the exact source, the exact quotation. But it basically said, as mentioned by a Jesuit priest about 4 centuries ago, the job of a missionary is to go where one is needed but not wanted, and stay until one is wanted but not needed. And so my life and career as a medical missionary, even though it's not a typical kind of career as a medical missionary. It's been very much along the lines of going where I wasn't particularly wanted and eventually getting myself into a place where people appreciated what I was doing. But having spent my life engaged in this type of work and also engaged in many ways in medical mission work through church and religious organizations, I asked myself, what's happened to our passion for missions? And particularly medical missions. I mean, 100 years ago, this was a big thing, and there are all kinds of critiques that have been made of missions and medical mission work, but it troubles me that we aren't more engaged in these types of issues. We do have a lot of people who are involved in short-term medical missions, but those activities are not the kind of serious approach to addressing these problems that I think that we need to take. And I could talk a lot about that, but I'm not going to now. Albert Schweitzer has been an inspiration for me for my whole life. And he has these wonderful words, which I would imagine some of you have heard because they're the words of an anthem that are sung from time to time in church services. But I think I'd like for you just to take a minute to read this. I won't read it for you. And for those of you who come from a Wesleyan Methodist tradition, these words of John Wesley have always inspired me. Do all the good you can by all the means you can, do all the people you can and all the places you can, as long as ever you can. So I think these are thoughts for us to keep in mind too. But now that my time is up, I wanted to read these words of the hymn, "In Christ There Is No East or West." This was something that we sang in our church when I was growing up in Greensboro, and the words were a great inspiration to me as I was thinking about a career as a medical missionary, and they still are highly resonant today, and I think they're highly appropriate for the comments that I made today. In Christ there is no east or west, in him no south or north, but one great fellowship of love throughout the whole wide earth. In him shall true hearts everywhere their high communion find. His service is the golden cord close binding all mankind. Join hands then, brothers of the faith, whatever your race may be, who serves my Father as a son, is surely kin to me. In Christ now meet both east and west, in him meet south and north. All Christly souls are one in him throughout the whole wide earth. Amen.
We invite you to unmute yourself and express our thanks to Henry for this very thought-provoking presentation. Next Sunday, we will hear from Christopher Morey, who is a doctoral student at UNC Chapel Hill, and his session with us will explore the many names of Jesus. Come and hear that. And as the recording ends, you're free to linger and visit with each other for a little bit longer, or ask more questions if you were being bashful just because you're afraid that somebody might hear your question out of context in the future.